Hello and welcome. You're watching a special India Today global conversation on combating and containing the rise of China. This is a challenge that not just India, but the whole grappling with. We have with us live on India Today a first-rate panel of global intellectual giants, titans in the field of foreign affairs. I want to start by introducing my first guest. 20 years ago, provocative political scientist and famed international relations theorist at the University of Chicago in the United States, John Mearsheimer, predicted that China's rise in the 21st century would not be peaceful and that China and the US would engage in a security competition which would end in war. For the last 2 decades, when China was the toast of the Western world and notions of shared economic prosperity shaped global opinion, Mearsheimer's dire prognosis of military confrontation seemed like a pessimist's cry. However, in 2020, even as the COVID-19 pandemic ravaged the world, China's aggressive maneuvers against India, Hong Kong, Vietnam, and Taiwan have sent alarm bells ringing worldwide. The dragon is baring its fangs, and a military clash with nuclear-armed India now looms on the horizon. Beijing is clearly in no mood to bide its time and hide its strength. John Mearsheimer, welcome to India Today. Traditionally, there's been a second theory about China's rise, which is put forth by the likes of my second guest on the show today, renowned East Asian diplomat Kishore Mahbubani. Mahbubani has been past president of the United Nations Security Council. He's the author of the new book, Has China Won? The Chinese Challenge to American Primacy. Mahbubani's argument is that China will, in the 21st century, usurp the US as the world's hegemon. However, he believes that China is a status quo power and not a revolutionary one, and that a clash with China is both inevitable and yet avoidable. Kishore Mahbubani, welcome. Where does India fit into this 21st century race to dominate the world? For a Desi perspective, I have Samir Saran, who's the president of one of Asia's most influential think tanks, the Observer Research Foundation. He's been thinking deeply about shaping India's response to China's rise. Samir has written a new book, Pax Sinica, Implications for the Indian Dawn, which looks at the rise of China and a vision of a world ordered by China's interests, designs and ambitions. Where are we headed after the bloody clash between the Indian and Chinese armies? Is a larger military escalation inevitable? Has China pushed India over the non-aligned edge and into the United States' strategic embrace? Can India and China dial down on current tensions, or will the line of actual control now be a hot border for the foreseeable future? Where does China antagonizing India fit into a larger geopolitical fight against the United States? Let's start this epic global clash of ideas. I'll start by asking Kishore Mahbubani, because going by what we are seeing the Chinese army do along the line of actual control and the Chinese government do in Hong Kong, Vietnam, Taiwan and the South China Sea, it would look like you've lost the argument even before this debate has begun.
Thank you. I would say that, of course, what happened between India and China is very tragic, very sad. The loss of life is really unfortunate. But I would make an important conceptual distinction between the relations between China and India, which are two sovereign countries, and China and Taiwan and China and Hong Kong. Hong Kong and Taiwan have been traditionally territories of China. Hong Kong was a British colony, and just as in 1961 or 62, I forget now, when John F. Kennedy and Harold Macmillan wrote to Jawaharlal Nehru and said, "Don't take back Goa." Jawaharlal Nehru did the right thing, and he said, "Goa is a colony on Indian soil. I will take it back." Hong Kong is the same as Goa. There's no fundamental difference between the two. And Taiwan also was seized by the Japanese. So I would say that what the issues between Hong Kong and Taiwan are difficult and will be hard to resolve, but they're a separate category from the relations between China and India, which of course basically The relationship between China and India is the second most important relationship in the world, I would say, after the relationship between US and China. And up to now, fortunately, most of the time it's been peaceful. Even the border you speak about has been peaceful. And I can tell you that most countries in the world would prefer to see China and India find a solution and live in peace with each other rather than engage in a new geopolitical context.
John Mearsheimer, to be able to predict 20 years ago that China's rise would lead to inevitable conflict, that we will see the kind of geopolitical realignment. I mean, it takes a genius to be able to do that. So now, for a long time, the world was in denial and your theories were being debunked. Now it seems that all of what you were saying is rather prescient. Do you have a timeline now for when you think a military clash with the United States, which is at the core of what you believe, is inevitable in the light of what we're seeing between the Indian and the Chinese armies?
Well, to be perfectly clear, I argued that you would end up with an intense security competition with a serious possibility of war. I didn't say that there would axiomatically be war. I think there's a very good chance there'll be war. But the fact is that Kishore is dead wrong when he says that China is a status quo power and that it's not interested in changing the balance of power in Asia. The fact is that China is interested in becoming a regional hegemon. It's interested in becoming the dominant power in Asia. It's interested in changing the status quo in the South China Sea. It's interested in changing the status quo in the East China Sea. It's interested in changing the status quo vis-a-vis Taiwan. And it's interested in changing the status quo regarding its border with India. As China becomes more and more powerful, it will take greater steps to change the border with India in its favor. This is just the way international politics works. Of course, the United States and the Indians will go to great lengths to make sure that this doesn't happen. And you see this taking place right now on the border between China and India. It is a tragic situation for sure, but as I've argued for a long time, it was inevitable.
Kishore Mehbubani, would you concede that you've lost this long-standing intellectual argument across the ocean with John Mearsheimer? Because when you say that China is a status quoist power, not a revisionist power, going by what we've seen in the middle of a raging global pandemic, a lot of what you're saying now seems intellectually very hollow and completely off the mark.
The bluntness of the question and the bluntness of the comments made by my good friend John. So let me respond, if you don't mind, in an equally blunt fashion. I did not say that China is a status quo power. I'm afraid our moderator said it. And if you read my book, I emphasize that China is now emerging as a great new power, and China is going to change the world. And let's be very clear about that. And that's the return of China, India, which I emphasize in my book, is perfectly natural, because from the year 1 to the year 1800, for 1800 of the last 2,000 years, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India. And therefore, the last 200 years of Western domination of world history by Europe in the 19th century, by America in the 20th century, was a complete historical aberration. And that aberration is coming to an end. And when an aberration comes to an end, is the end of the status quo. So I'm not in any way arguing that one thing that you cannot stop ever is to stop human history from flowing and bringing back the power of the Asian countries that were the dominant for 1800 years. Is that, when I argue about the return of Asia, are you telling me I'm arguing for status quo? Or am I saying the 21st century will be the Asian century? Now tell me, who's arguing for status quo? And guess what? The country that will have the hardest time adjusting to this will be the current status quo powers, which is the United States of America. And I can assure you one thing too, if you want to have a very frank, honest discussion about these matters, the country that's going to benefit the most from any clash within China and India is the United States of America. That's very clear. So, and if you want to see a war, the United States, and I agree with John Mearsheimer, war is not inevitable. When you have war between two nuclear powers, both nuclear powers will lose. So it is up to us now to understand that the world has changed fundamentally and to deal with new realities and not sail with old conceptual maps. I speak not about the past, I speak about the future, and I bet you I've been right for 30 years in predicting the return of Asia, and I bet you I'll be right in the next 30 years. Want to take a bet? I mean, now.
John Mearsheimer, has the United States failed to adjust to the growing might of China? And is the US the status quo as power? You're hoping that you will stay in the kind of position you were for the last several decades, not realizing the speed at which China has developed its capabilities.
Well, the United States has done something worse than fail to adjust to the rise of China. The United States has foolishly fed the rise of China. The United States, over the course of the 1990s and the first decade and a half of the 2000s, went to great lengths to make China more and more powerful economically. We, in effect, have created a potential peer competitor. This is remarkably foolish. But we now have recognized the danger, and the United States is moving quickly to try to contain China. This, of course, is why India and China are now becoming fast friends, because they have a common foe. Kishore likes to talk about the return of Asia, and he sees this growing conflict as very much Asia against the West. Kishore is simply wrong here. This is not Asia against the West. This is China against many of its neighbors, including India, which is part of Asia, and against the United States. So you're going to have a situation here where India and the United States, Vietnam and the United States, India, Japan, Australia, and the United States are all going to be allied in a balancing coalition against China. And the reason they're going to do this is because, as Kishore said, the Chinese are going to change the world. That's their goal. They want to change the world. Indeed, they want to change the border with India. But India doesn't want that to happen. The United States doesn't want that to happen. And that's why nobody could ever argue that China is a status quo power and that this ensuing competition is going to have a happy ending. We are in deep trouble, and the situation is only going to get worse with time.
Samir Saran, the larger geopolitical fight globally is for domination between China and the United States. China has set a target of somewhere in the middle of this century. Maybe they're advancing their timelines where they think that China will rule the world. In this fight between China and the United States, what role do you see for India in the context of the current border clash between India and China along the line of actual control?
Now, let me try to attempt this question that you posed to me differently. Let us try and understand, if you are sitting in New Delhi and if you are someone who's been engaging with the Chinese at the BRICS at a bilateral level in difficult times, you are beginning to see a pattern emerge. And I want to use a 3M framework to position China in this debate. A 3M, of course, I mean, I'm not referring to the face masks that we all have to wear because of the virus that came from China, but a 3M alphabet framework. The first, of course, is I think you're beginning to see the huge emergence of a Middle Kingdom identity again. I think the time when they were hiding and biding their time is over. They now believe they are center of the world and no rules will restrict their global and domestic behavior. They have a neo-Confucian conception of their place, somewhere between heaven and earth. And this, in some sense, forms the cutting edge of Chinese exceptionalism. Now, exceptionalism is not new, but the Chinese exceptionalism is aided by two other M's. The second M is that this exceptionalism is aided by modern tools for engagement. They are beginning to acquire and dominate global platforms, global public spheres, global media organizations. They are building technology tools for growth and control, and they are investing in modern armies to ravage and plunder. And the Chinese have done this exceedingly well. And I agree with John, underwritten largely by American enterprise. And finally, the last M is the medieval mindset. So while they may be a middle kingdom with modern tools, their mindset is extremely medieval. It believes in state control over innovation, enterprise, and individuals. It believes in the tribute system, now disguised as the Belt and Road Initiative. It partners with authoritarian and repressive regimes. It engages in debt trap diplomacy or loan in exchange for sovereignty. It has re-engineered all the non-Han population from Xinjiang to Inner Mongolia. It has used iron rods with nails and baseball bats with barbed wires in its clashes while committing that there will be no weaponry and arms being used in border confrontations. They have not admitted to their casualties because for them, Chinese people are fodder for the larger dynasty that now is represented by Emperor Xi. And this Xi dynasty has plans of 2049. It sees India as a near irritant. It sees India as a discordant neighbor, which has rejected the BRI, which surprised it with its tenacity at Doklam. It is back with a relentless vengeance. It is probing India at multiple points. It is not going to tolerate insubordination in its neighborhood.
Okay.
It believes that the Asian hierarchy must see its neighbors and see all Asian countries submit to it. It is not interested in the $3 trillion Indian market, nor is it interested in the smaller ASEAN market.
Kishore
It wants
Mehbubani
to be the big boy in Brussels. It wants the $20 trillion cash prize that the European Union presents. It sees us as stumbling blocks. Its big enemy is the US. Eventually, it is going to get there. People must realize that what's happening in the Himalayas is the front line for what is likely to unfold in the next decade unless it is responded to.
Kishore Mehbubani, you pose a rosy picture of China's rise, presenting the current situation as Asia making a comeback against the West. Sitting where we are in India, it doesn't seem like Asia versus the West. It seems like China versus the rest. And the manner in which you present this argument, that this is all of Asia and the rise of Asia, it's not the rise of Asia. It's a very dangerous rise of Emperor Xi's dynasty, as Samir Saran says, which wishes to conquer the world.
Well, I can understand, seriously, the concerns in India about the rise of China. It's perfectly natural. In 1980, you had your GNP was the same size as China. Today, China's GNP is 5 times the size of India. So if I was an Indian, I guess the first question I would ask is, what happened? How is it that two countries with about the same population had the same GNP around 1980, and now, 40 years later, China's GNP is 5 times the size? I think part of the answer for that is given by John earlier, when John said that the United States facilitated the rise of China. And I completely agree with him on that, because it was very generous of the United States to open up its markets to the Chinese. He was very generous of the United States to open up to Chinese students, and he was very generous of the United States to welcome China into the WTO. So I think all these things happen as a result of policies that were made in the past. And unfortunately, we cannot change the past, but we can change the future. The future is what we should be talking about. What do we do about that? And I think, you can, of course, go headlong towards a new Cold War with China, and I stress that in my book I say, indeed, as you accurately said in my book, I argue that a major U.S.-China clash is both inevitable and avoidable, and everybody is stressing the inevitable part, which I agree with. But I think we should also pay equal attention to the avoidable part, and the reason for that is the number one priority for most countries in the world today, and I suspect the number one country even for India and United States now, is to focus on the development of the country, handling the incredibly urgent, immediate problem of COVID-19, handling the urgent, immediate problems of global warming. There's so many important global issues that we have to deal with. There's so many people we have to rescue from poverty. how do we go about doing all that? And my argument basically is that it is wiser for us to avoid any kind of new Cold War or a hot war, certainly, and try and focus on the issues that are of fundamental interest to us. And that kind of pragmatism is, of course, unpopular, because it's very popular to take a very hawkish view and say, we must stand up, we must do this. But even if you refer to your traditional Indian strategic thinker, Kautilya, what's his first piece of advice that he gives? He says, listen, if you want to go into a war, good, let's go to war. But first, look at the size of your army and look at the size of your opposing army and ask, am I going to win? And if you're going to win, you charge. If you're not going to win, don't charge, Kautilya says. This is an Indian strategic thinker. So clearly, there's no doubt that there will be competition between China and India, but clearly you have to work out a long-term strategy to deal with a power like China. And getting emotional and impulsive is exactly the wrong thing to do. And in fact, the key argument of my book, Has China Won?, is that I actually I call upon the United States to work out a long-term strategy to deal with China, because the return of China, and by the way, the return of India, we both China and India, the return of China and India is unstoppable. It's going to happen.
Samir Saran, Kishore Mehbubani makes the argument that it is still possible for the government of India, the government of China, the people of India, the people of China to grow together. Do you still hold on to that hope, which was key to our strategic thinking with China for the last 6 years? Or do you think after what happened in Galwan, the relationship between India and China is dust for the foreseeable future?
Rahul, I am someone, if you look at my earlier works, and you would find that I have always argued that India's and Asia's future growth will be based on how well can India and China manage their bilateral relationship. I agree with Kishore that in the second half of this century, the most important relationship would be that between India and China. And the question we have to ask is that relationship going to be defined by a beneficial partnership that produces value for the billions that reside in this region, or is it going to be the beginning of a Himalayan Cold War? I think the Chinese have an edge, as Kishore mentioned. They are 5 times the size. They're probably 4 times our strength in terms of military. And they are certainly more adept at maneuvering today. But that may not be the case in 7 to 8 years' time. And what China is doing today, it is ensuring that 550 million young Indians will view them perpetually as an enemy. And I think the Chinese must realize that in free societies with very vibrant and loud public spheres, where even your own prime minister is subject to criticism loudly, like he has been in the last 24 hours, it is unlikely that people are going to forgive and forget Chinese behavior. As the larger power, as the larger economy, as the largest actor in Asia, I think it is the Chinese that have to decide the terms of engagement with India today. Getting onto our borders and killing our soldiers and creating aggression is not the terms of an economic partnership of the future. I think the Chinese will have to decide that. The same way that I have argued that India with its smaller neighbors has to be the magnanimous actor. Now, you cannot have 2 sets of rules for India, that they must be more magnanimous with their neighbors, which they, by the way, struggle to do. And I'm one of those who has said this. But in our relationship with China, we have to see the Chinese offering a relationship which is going to be non-conflictual. And I think the Chinese in the last year have not offered.
If we look out into the future, would you concede to Kishore Mehbubani when he asks the question, has China won? Is the US in decline now, virtually slipping into a position where they will not be able to stop the rise and domination of China? Or do you believe the US with countries like India can still come together, like was the case against the USSR, and form a containment strategy which will pin down China and not allow them to dominate the world? John Moshimaya.
Well, it's almost impossible to predict what's going to happen 30, 40, 50 years from now. But as I've said before to Kishore, I would not bet against the United States. The United States faced 4 potential peer competitors in the 20th century: Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union. The United States played a key role in putting all 4 of those potential competitors on the scrap heap of history. The United States will go to enormous lengths to contain China, There's no question that China is getting more powerful, and there's no question, and I want to emphasize this, that Kishore is correct when he says that China is bent on changing the world. But you should understand that the United States, and I believe India and Japan and many of China's neighbors will rise to the occasion, and they will go to great lengths to work together to contain China and to prevent China from changing the world. Because from the perspective of a country like India, China changing the world is not good news, because that means they're going to change the status quo on the India-China border in China's favor. They're going to build a blue water navy and move into the Indian Ocean and make life miserable for the Indians. You can rest assured that this is what changing the world in China's favor means. So you Indians and we Americans and many other countries in Asia have a vested interest in working together to contain China. And I believe it can be done, and that Kishore's claim that the Chinese have won and this is all hopeless is wrong.
So has China won, and should India move closer to America's strategic embrace and end our ambivalence, our desire to seek strategic autonomy? Because it clearly isn't working, because in the manner in which China is acting, it's very clear it wants to push India down. It's uncomfortable with the rise of India. However, Kishore Mahbubani argues that India and China can rise together. Is that really the case? I'm going to slip into a break. We're having a fascinating conversation, three different perspectives, bringing out three very intellectually strong points of view.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.